Okay, let's go on to familiarising you with CfEM action research for 21 and 22. I've got 4 slides to go through, and then something for us all to discuss. Okay, so this is the next section. So let's start with some fundamentals. What are we trying to do here? Top ultimate aim, and something where in all your work, all your projects, have a clear line of sight, please, to improving learner progress and ultimately improving grades, improving attainment over grades. This is for GCSEs and functional skills. Really, we're talking about level 2. The second thing we're all trying to achieve here through action research in the next year is to find solutions for college or network. So by problem, I mean, you know, in the positive, embracing sort of, oh, that could be better, or that didn't work. Why didn't it work? Or these things aren't sort of jarring against each other or seeming to be in tension. So there are all sorts of natures of problems. Sometimes, you know, it's like opening a can of worms, but these usually in action research are really quite specific, targeted, small things that you can resolve through gathering evidence and then move on to the next problem or issue. So finding solutions to identified problems. And the third one, to routinely share lessons learned in and across CfEMs. And there is greater emphasis this year coming on that one than there has been over the last 2 years. And really, we're kicking that off with CfEM Live, the conferences. We've got the first one on Friday, which is great, where we're going to encourage everybody to attend, to identify lessons that they want to take from this year's projects and feed those in as one of many influences to shape next year's too. And what they immediately want to implement, what you immediately want to implement in your own classrooms, obviously too, or have a go at. So those are the 3 things that we're actually trying to do here in CfEM action research. Now, a little bit of theory. What sort of research are we doing here? As mathematicians, you may be more used to and comfortable with the green arrow, which is the sort of normative positivist, the scientific research, tends to be quantitative, tends to be statistical, and its notion of truth comes from that proof through figures that something is the case. Now, going to the other extreme on the spectrum of research, the purple one, there are a whole raft of researchers out there who come from a very different tradition, where the subjective, the anecdotal really matters. It's about how people speak and on what sort of the unsaid and the sort of cultural details. Things are circumstantial, you might say, and there are multiple truths, particularly when you're dealing with human beings. But I think our research is somewhere between those, a bit of a mix, but somewhere between those, the blue arrow going diagonally, where in FE, in education, there are multiple variables coming to play simultaneously that influence a learner's behaviour or a learner's response, or how a group interacts and so on. And it's not always rational. Human beings are not rational. Funny things happen. You know, politics come into it with a little p, with, you know, certain things being set or certain things, you know, being accepted and not challenged. But what we're looking for is patterns and relationships. We're looking for explanations. we're looking for practical solutions and what works, but very much within the context, the reality and the honest reality of your cultures and your settings and your cohorts, and the tricky task of delivering a maths curriculum that doesn't necessarily always suit these people, and so on. So that's just food for thought on the research style. Right, back to basics on the action and the research. Action just means your daily practice as a teacher or a trainer or a support staff. Research, systematic investigation of a specific topic to discover new information or understand things better. Now, I say new information, new to you or new to your college doesn't mean that this thing that you've come up with is new to the entire globe, but it's new to you, and that's good enough. There's a lot of good practice literature out there and good practice conferences and so on, but not everyone's following those at all. And in your settings, in your CfEMs and in your individual colleges, of course, there's a range of quality and a range of types of practice and a range of confidence amongst your teachers as well. So it acknowledges all of that. But action research puts the change, the practical change, the action, the daily practice really close to the research and tries to get them sort of ping-ponging off each other. The idea being that you can have greater impact if your research is really close to your practice and really relevant. Right, and my last slide in this little section is on action research cycles. I'm hoping that the idea of a cycle is familiar to most people here. An action research cycle is just one of these circles I've got on this screen. I've got 3 cycles on this screen, you can see, and it starts with observe, which means almost like a little person or a parrot on your shoulder watching what's going on in your class as it's happening. So it's self-observation, it's what's actually happening here in my teaching. What am I actually doing? How are learners actually responding? And then immediately, as soon as possible after that, or even during the same session, reflecting. How did that go? What actually happened? What could have been better? Who did it work for? Who did it not? And then ACT is the word they've used. This is McNiff and Whitehead, but there are loads of versions of action research cycles out there. ACT in this case means go off and do some reading, go off and talk to colleagues. How do they deal with this? This, whatever you're thinking about, one aspect of your lesson probably. And plan and get together some new way of doing that, a new approach. Try that out. And then you evaluate that. You need to gather some evidence, maybe from multiple perspectives. And then you modify. So you're going to change your actual practice. Maybe you'll carry on doing that forevermore. But maybe you think, oh, actually, I've done enough on that. I want a new focus. Or you think, okay, that worked well. I've modified my practice. It's worked well for 80% of my students, but there's 20% it doesn't really work for. So I've got to come up with something new for them. And then go round the action research cycle again, just targeted on one small dimension again. So the key points here are action research cycles we're going to be using, multiple cycles within the year, and each one, and they are iterative. So one feeds into an idea for the next, which feeds into an idea for the next. Okay. Another point here is, if you've worked with cycles before, you may not have done this, is to link action research cycle stages with the traditional research stages. So the literature review might come in at the reflect stage, where you're gathering, or the ACT stage, where you're gathering ideas for what other people have found works, conversation with colleagues as well. The evaluate, data collection, traditional research, we call it data collection, and analysis. And the modify, well, it's whatever's in your conclusions or recommendations, what you're going to do from now on. Okay, so you can layer over what you know about research, or some traditional stages of research, literature review, planning, data collection, analysing, writing that up over the top of your action research cycles. Okay, so those are a few background concepts and what we're trying to achieve, just to really launch you into action research for this year. The next document we have as a handout. It's on the landing page. Yeah, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to look at this. It's an example. It's only an example. But I know that some of you are really itching to get together your timetables. There's a lot to go into those timetables. So don't rush it and think, right, that's it, done, because there are various things. You want to think about doing more than a couple of action research cycles this year coming. And so I've got cycle 1, where I've called it exploration, in half term 2, so that's October to December. And I've got an idea of something I want to do, and therefore the data collection methods and what I'm going to do. And then that wiggly line then feeds into iteratively cycle 2, which for me is a refinement, just as an example. I'm going to say cycle 1 worked quite well. I found out a lot there, but now I know I need to hone in on a particular aspect. So a refinement of what I want to focus on in cycle 2. I go through cycle 2, and then I'm going to move on to something different in cycle 3, just a related aspect, maybe. As you begin to move towards doing your project timelines, which is something that you will be required to do and keep live, you'll also want to access the Padlet on the timeline on the Padlet for this training. And you'll have obviously your own college and your partner college's FE maths timeline, and you know when the exam windows are, and so on, all your key dates there. So there's quite a lot to be layering over here. But I'm going to be quiet now for a couple of minutes and invite you to have a look at this example and then pop into chat or unmute yourself. So a couple of minutes to look at this now. Right, I've thrown quite a lot at you. Some of you will be taking this in your stride. It'll feel familiar or a step on from where you've been before. Others, this will feel very new, and that's absolutely fine. Could I have some feedback, please? From anyone, just unmute yourself or pop something in chat. Is this useful? Are you getting the idea? Are there whole gaps that we can say, yes, we'll go on to cover, or I need to address? Paloma, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so it seems to me from reading this that you're sort of starting with the broad, so you've got your question, you're starting broadly, and then you're narrowing down in your second and third cycle. Like that's how that plan seems to read, in terms of it's like broad base of use and carefully targeted groups, and then highly relevant to specific research focus. I'm curious as to whether this approach involves the same teachers through all of the cycles, or whether it's like a lot of teachers get involved for cycle 1 and then a fewer teachers are involved for cycle 2 and then even fewer still for cycle 3? Or like when we were discussing it at work today, I kind of told teachers that they might even just be able to be involved for one term if that's all they felt that they could spare. And now I don't know if that was true.
Okay, yeah. We would definitely encourage the same cohort of teachers to go all the way through. And so that, we would encourage that. Now, there's always a dose of reality in here, isn't there? So it may well be that certain teachers can only commit, or they'd only commit this year because you want to reel them in for next year, So I think, there's flexibility there, Paloma. I'm not going to dictate, I can only advise, it's your team. It's how you can coax the best out of, and you're the facilitator and the shaper of what they kind of want to do, with quite a heavy dose of influence from you. This example, you're absolutely right. It does start quite exploratory. It's quite broad. And then after a term of teachers talking to each other and reading up and having a first go at something, then they hone in on something. Yes, but it doesn't have to be like that. It could be that you start on something very specific and that carries on through, or you start on something specific and you think to start with, okay, I want to investigate this, but then in the second cycle you realize, oh, there's a tech aspect. Oh, there's a vocational teachers link aspect. Oh, there's, so there, it may be that, I would encourage in the first half term, the group starts off together, but there may be a couple of teachers, 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know, who want to go off and investigate one thing because they feel passionate about that, and that's relevant to their classrooms in cycle 2, and a couple of teachers go off and do something slightly different for themselves. They have a slightly different cycle 2, and then you come back together again and exchange notes. So it does give you there, Paloma, some flexibility. That's another model, could give you some flexibility. If teachers feel that they can do, a bit, I would engage them however you could in the first half term to get to pick their brains of their ideas, get them feeling some ownership and involved, even if they're not doing, a data collection or something else to start with.
Can I clarify? So in an action research group, if we have 4 teachers, each of those 4 teachers could be trying out a different new thing.
I wouldn't recommend teachers do it individually. I would recommend the absolute minimum is 2 working together. So if you've just got 4, you may well want just your 4 working on the same thing, because 4 is a nice number to kind of bounce ideas off, have a range of practice, share the load, encourage each other. You might want to buddy them up into 2 twos if there's 2 on one site and 2 on another. Get them working a bit closer together. They will sort of inevitably. Right. Come back at me again, Paloma.
Yeah, okay. I think I've been misselling it then, in the sense that we have an overarching theme or question that we're exploring, and I've kind of been going, well, you can try something out if it relates to this theme, and sort of giving it on a very individual basis. If, saying to teachers, if you've got an idea that you want to try out, right, you can do that. But it seems actually, and this is a good point to be getting clear on this, is that what we need to, I guess, once we've got everyone's ideas, we need to get people to agree to work on the same idea.
Right. That's it. It is collaborative action research. That gives it the fire and the drive. It gives it the shared responsibility and the shared burden. So collaborative action research is a really good way of thinking about it. So it might be one person's idea, but then other people help on it. Then the next person's idea, other people help on it. And then you've got this mixture of share of ownership and initiative and all the rest of it. I think you can make that work. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, that's probably a good thing. I'm not quite sure if silence is a good thing.
Kath, just a quickie. As I was looking at it again, cycle 3, moving on, the data collection methods using very similar questions. Can you just unpick that tiny little bit?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, okay. So that relates to, if you are asking students questions, you might want to ask the equivalent, the same topics or the same sorts of things to staff. That's all it means. So that you've got the staff perspective and the student perspective on the same thing. It's very easy to ask students something and then ask staff actually something a bit different. And so it's then hard to sort of triangulate or compare. You'll get different perspectives on the same sort of topic. That's all that means there. Yeah. Perfect. So this is one example, one model, but it's a good example of a step towards mapping out your action research. You know, gives a frame, gives the beginnings of a time windows, which is probably the next step for you at the moment. You don't quite know exactly who's in your action research group. You don't quite know exactly what your specific first topic for your cycle is going to be, or your research questions for that. That's okay. But you can start to put some of the jigsaw pieces, some of the blocks in place as you plan your timelines.